Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another planetarium show. And welcome to night one of our fourth annual Dark Sky Caravan. We are super excited to be with you here tonight. My name is Jessica. I'm the director of the planetarium, and with me are a couple of our students and grad students who work at the planetarium. And I will let them say hi and introduce themselves. And we'll start with Lindsay.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm a physics graduate student at UMD.
I'm Eli. I'm a physics undergraduate student at UMD.
So, for our Dark Sky Caravan this year, we're doing kind of a hybrid model. If you went to our event, what, 2 years ago, it was all kind of in-person planetarium shows, telescopes, all sorts of fun stuff. Then last year we switched to it being all virtual, and this year we're doing a bit of both. So tonight and tomorrow night will be virtual shows, and then the rest of the week will be star parties set up at various locations, and we can talk more about that later. So for tonight, what we wanted to talk with you about is kind of how you can enjoy the dark skies, because that is one of our goals of our Dark Sky Caravan, and why it's named so, is to celebrate the dark skies that we still have here in northern Minnesota, and kind of make sure we have that appreciation for it, not take it for granted, and to try and preserve those dark skies. And so tonight we're going to look at kind of ways that you can enjoy it and view it, and some of the fun stuff that you can do, like astrophotography, which is not as difficult as you might think to get into, and Lindsay will take us through all that. And then tomorrow night, we're going to be joined by someone from the Chick-Rock Museum and Nature Center up at the end of the Gunflint Trail, who is going to talk about kind of what it means to have a dark sky status that is an official kind of sanctuary status you can have, and ways that we can kind of preserve those dark skies and minimize light pollution. And then after that, um, after our guests, we'll talk kind of more about some of the things that you'll be able to see in dark skies in preparation for our star parties coming up the rest of the week. All right, now, as always, if you have any questions throughout the show, feel free to leave them down in the comments. Eli's going to keep an eye on those for me and will let me know if any questions come up. So, let me get set up here. All right. So as I said, to start us off, we are going to be taking a look at kind of how we can enjoy the night sky. And when we have truly dark skies, when we're out away from the city, where we have very little light pollution, there is a lot to see in the night sky. We can see a couple thousand stars. Sometimes you'll be able to see planets. Sometimes the moon will be up, which isn't always advantageous, by the way. The moon, if you've never noticed, especially if you've never seen the moon kind of outside of city, the moon is really bright. The moon is actually what we call a natural source of light pollution. And so if you want to see a bunch of other things in the sky, you actually don't want the moon up, because it's bright enough that it could drown out the light coming from other things in the nighttime sky.
Hey, Jessica.
Yeah.
On the stream, you haven't pinned your.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Just trying to do too many things at once. Okay, there we go. All right. So we can see stars. Sometimes we can see the hazy band of our Milky Way galaxy. We can see planets, the moon. There's lots of things to see. So to enjoy these dark sky views, there's a few different ways that we can do that. And first off, the very first way we're going to talk about, it does not require really any equipment if you don't want it. And that's just naked eye observations, just looking at the night sky with your eyes. And I mean, you can do this anytime, but a lot of people, when they start to get out, especially into dark skies, want to know what they're looking at. And so we've compiled kind of a list of some of our favorite ways of navigating the night sky and kind of learning what's where and what it is we're looking at. So one of the things that you can use is something called a star chart or a sky map. We, at the beginning of each month for all of our monthly shows, we always link to a place that you can print off your own sky map for each month. In fact, I have that link down in the video description if you want to find it. But what this is showing is for the month of, in this case, August, for viewers in the Northern Hemisphere, this is roughly what the sky is going to look like. And I say roughly because the exact position of the stars and things will vary depending on exactly what your latitude is. So you're going to have a little bit of forgiveness, a little bit of give here in exactly where things are placed. But the way you end up reading or using one of these is it's kind of like a map of the sky overhead. And so it's kind of projecting that dome onto a flat circle. And so the very center of the circle is directly overhead. And then the outer edge of the circle is your horizon. And you can see that it has the cardinal directions posted on it. So this is along the horizon to the north or along the horizon to the east. So if, for example, we wanted to look for Cassiopeia here, we would turn towards the northeast, kind of north-northeast here, and look a little ways above the horizon, not all the way to directly overhead, but maybe about a third of the way up. And we will see that W of Cassiopeia in the sky. And you can use this the other way too. Say you're looking south and you see something that kind of looks like a teapot. That's a little bit off the horizon. We can look at our sky map here and look at the south, a little bit above the horizon, and there's the teapot. There is actually something in the sky called the teapots. So this is a good way that you can kind of have on hand to try and find certain things or use it to kind of figure out what it is you're looking at. Another thing you can use, and this is something that we have used a lot on these streams, is a program like Stellarium. And this is a free program. Again, I have a link down in the video description. And this works just like a planetarium on your computer. You give it your location, and you give it the date and time, and it shows you what the sky looks like. Now, in our case, we want to look at the time when it's darker, so we're just going to go forward a few hours. And then it shows us what's going to be up at that time. It points out the planets and where they're going to be. You can turn on the constellations to learn about the constellations. You can turn on what are called deep sky objects. And if you want, we'll learn more about that tomorrow. So this is another good way to kind of learn how to navigate the sky and also kind of plan out where it is you want to look. Similarly, you can actually use a website called Time and Date to do something like this as well. Oops. So Time and Date actually has a timeanddate.com has a sun and moon section, which will tell you things like the moon phase, when the moon's going to be up, but it also has a night sky tab here, where it does something very similar to what Stellarium was showing us. It shows us kind of for our location, where the planets are going to be and kind of points out what everything is going to look like. And so things like this website and Stellarium are great to kind of plan ahead of what you want to do. But if you're kind of in the moment and maybe you forgot to print out your sky map, your star chart, there are some really, really great phone apps that can actually help you with this. They use your phone's GPS to figure out where you're located. And then if you hold up your phone, it'll show you what it is you're looking at. So it'll show you names of stars, constellations, if there's a planet, what planet it is. And so what I have here listed are a few that we use. I've personally used the first two, Sky Map and Star Chart. They're both free. SkyMap is only for Android. Star Chart is for all devices. And then Eli, I know, likes Sky Guide. Do you want to say something about that, Eli?
Yeah, I just really like Sky Guide. It does cost, I think it's $1.29 or whatever apps are as a standard on the App Store. But I just really like it. It has really cool artwork, and it's pretty accurate for when I use it. It also sends me like push notifications when cool stuff's going on, like when the ISS passes over, which is nice. And it also has like little information sections on whatever you're looking at. So like it gives like a little history rundown of whatever it is and like a short description of every object. So it's pretty nifty.
Yeah. And I will say, since it is paid, I will give the disclaimer, we are not getting anything from this. This is just from our personal use. This is an app that is very good. All right. There are also a few other apps that could be interesting to have. I personally use one that's literally called Moon Phases, or Moon Phases Calendar. Or, no, sorry, Phases of the Moon. That's what it's called. And it literally tells you exactly that. For that specific date and time that you open the app, it tells you what the moon phase is. It also has a calendar to show you when the different phases are. If you zoom in on the moon, it'll tell you what some of the big features that you're seeing are. So this is another really fun one. And then the last one that we're going to share is one about the aurora. And this is literally an app called Aurora. And it is kind of a notification app, so it'll tell you what the chances are of seeing the aurora at your location. And you can also set it to alert you when those chances get good. And so you'll actually get a notification that says, hey, your chance of seeing the aurora is significantly higher right now, you should go outside. So this is a great app as well. All right, so
We actually just got a question.
Yeah.
Probably a good time to do it. How do our northern Minnesota skies compare in darkness with the dark skies over large uninhabited areas such as the oceans or Antarctica?
So those would be obviously some of the darkest skies because no light pollution. But there are areas in northern Minnesota that do have a level 1 dark sky, which is basically the darkest you can get. So comparable, honestly. And a lot of these areas are either have gotten dark sky certified or are in the process of getting kind of dark sky sanctuary status so that we can preserve those dark skies. It's actually in northern Minnesota, we have I believe it's the darkest skies east of the Mississippi. The only other place in the US where you find these dark skies is out in the west, in the desert, where you have a lot of uninhabited areas. So yeah, we are very lucky up here with what we've got. And I don't know, Lindsay, I don't know, because you worked at Bryce Canyon, which is out west, right?
Yeah, so it's in southern Utah in the middle of the desert.
Would you say it's comparable?
No, but also when we've been up at the end of the Gunflint with the Dark Sky Caravan, we're usually in a spot that has lights, and so people can get around and stuff like that.
Yes, that's true.
So I'm not sure we've really been in super dark skies, but at Bryce Canyon National Park, I could see the star cluster and the Hercules constellation with my naked eye.
Yeah, and so, I mean, presumably you could do that too if you do get away into a really dark area. Because it should be comparable in skies, but you're right, we usually do have some lights on because we have crowds of people coming up. Yeah. All right, so moving on from naked eye, obviously it's after kind of spending some time just looking at the sky with your eyes, a lot of people want to go, to the next step and use something to magnify their view and be able to see things a little bit closer and a little bit more detail. And of course, for most people, the first thing that comes to mind is a telescope. But we like to remind people that you don't actually have to have a telescope for this. A good pair of binoculars will get you a pretty good view and maybe a good kind of stepping stone from going from nothing to telescope. Maybe get like a pair of binoculars. I don't have a lot of experience with binoculars, but I did find what looked like a really good list of kind of the best binoculars for beginners that seem to be reasonably priced. We're talking around $100 to $200. So you can find, I put a link to that list in the video description. But this is an option that a lot of people don't know about. But we will talk about telescopes because I know that's usually what people are wanting to get to is end up getting a telescope. And then they go to try and buy a telescope and they get overwhelmed by all of the options, all of these words that they may not know what it means. And so for the rest of my portion of the show tonight, I want to give you kind of a little bit of knowledge into what these different terms are and kind of what you want to look for a first-time telescope. So the first thing that describes a telescope is kind of the optics, what it uses to collect and magnify the light. So one type of telescope is a refracting telescope, and it uses a lens at the front of the telescope to collect the light, which sends it to the back to an eyepiece, which magnifies the image and focuses it onto your eye. Now, these were the very first design of telescopes that were invented, and you'll find a lot of really, really cheap telescopes are refractors. You'll also find a lot of very expensive telescopes are refractors. And those really expensive ones are trying to correct a common problem that you find with refractors. And this is what we call chromatic aberration. You see, when different colors pass through that glass lens, and my phone is dying, sorry. When different colors pass through this glass lens, they aren't all bent exactly the same way by the glass. And so the blue ends up focusing at a different place than the green, which focuses at a different place than the red. And so the image that you see is kind of fuzzy and spread out in different colors. You see more of like a rainbow image instead of one kind of focused color image. And the very expensive refracting telescopes have different lens designs to try and minimize this effect. The cheap ones don't. And they also use, plastic lenses instead of glass lenses, and you get what you pay for, basically. Another type of telescope, instead of a refractor or a refracting telescope, you can have a reflecting telescope. And instead of having a lens at the front, it has a mirror at the back. And the mirror does much the same thing. It collects the light coming from the sky, sends it to the eyepiece, and the eyepiece, which is the same design, focuses that and magnifies that image on your eye. The benefit to a mirror is you don't have this chromatic aberration. All colors reflect off of a mirror in the same way. Mirrors can also usually be made bigger for cheaper than lenses. So you can make mirrors bigger and not spend as much as you would to make a lens that same size. Now, this isn't to say reflectors aren't with their problems. Depending on the exact shape of the mirror, you can have issues when you look at stars kind of whose light's hitting more on the outside instead of the very center. But usually for people, that's not that big of a problem because what you want to look at, you center in your field of view, and so it's going to be hitting center on the mirror. So this isn't usually a problem most people have to really think about. Now, the third type of telescope is really a combination of the two. It's a compound or catadioptric telescope, and it has both a lens at the front and a mirror at the back. And the idea is to kind of take the benefits of both to try and correct for the flaws of both. And so it kind of corrects a lot of the chromatic aberration, and then it also corrects for that kind of edge smearing that can happen with reflecting telescopes. Of course, these are expensive because you're getting both a lens and a mirror. So those are the main telescope itself. So we have the three types: refracting, which uses a lens; reflecting, which uses a mirror; and compound or catadioptric, which uses both. The other thing you're going to see is descriptions for the thing that the telescope stands on. We call the telescope mount. And there are kind of two main categories for this. There's what's called an Altitude-Azimuth mount, or an Alt-Az. And this basically turns your telescope side to side and up and down. It's a very simple, basic way, very beginner friendly, and what we recommend. The other type that you will often see is an equatorial mount. Instead of moving side to side and up and down, this one sits at an angle and moves along an arc, moves along kind of a circular path. And these are generally not recommended for beginners because they take a lot of know-how to be able to set them up correctly. This angle that they're at has to be set to exactly the angle that the North Star is at for your location. Or else you're not going to get the benefits of the equatorial mount. So because of the steeper learning curve and the bit more care, I guess, that has to go into setting it up correctly, this is more of an intermediate or advanced telescope mount. One other thing you may see is telescopes often come in a kind of manual where you move it by hand, or they come computerized, where they actually have a little motor that moves the telescope around. A lot of these also have kind of catalogs of objects that you can basically say, I want to look at Mars, and it'll move it to Mars for you and then track it and follow it across the sky as Mars moves, which offhand sounds fantastic. It sounds perfect. But there are some downsides to this. One, the cost. You're paying for a mini computer. So these are obviously going to be pricier. But two, there is a bit involved in the setup because you have to tell the computer where you are and give it kind of like point it and say that star is Vega, and then point it and say that star is Arcturus, and tell the computer what it's looking at so that it can orient itself correctly. So there is a steep learning curve in that setup, and you have to feel comfortable with the night sky to be able to do that. So as handy as they are, we actually don't recommend a computerized telescope straight up for beginners. So before we kind of get into exactly what we recommend, there are a few other things that you may find when looking for a telescope. You'll see the aperture of the telescope, or the kind of size of the lens or the mirror. This is the overall size of the telescope, and in this case, kind of bigger is better. The bigger your aperture, the bigger the lens, the bigger the mirror is, the more light it collects, and the more you're going to be able to see. However, there is a downside to that. Because the bigger that mirror or lens is, the more expensive the telescope is, but also the less portable the telescope is. And so unless you're going to have an observatory set up in your backyard where you're never going to move the telescope, you want to think about how easy it's going to be to carry it and move it to different locations where you want to observe. You also need to think about who's going to be using that. Because for some telescopes, the big telescopes can be pretty high off the ground, where the eyepiece is, where you would look in. And so you may have to think about, are kids going to be using this? Am I going to need to get something like a stepladder so that they can get up and see it? Now, with all of this said, and I know you may start looking at prices of telescopes and then go to a big box store and see a $20 telescope and think, great, I'm just going to do that. Please don't. Like I said at the beginning, you get what you pay for. These are very cheaply made, very flimsy. The mount that they come on is not steady. The optics, the lenses that they use are not well made. And honestly, most of the time, kids that are super excited about astronomy and a telescope and getting to look through them only get frustrated because it's not working well, and then they end up becoming so frustrated that they lose interest in it. So as nice as it might be to think about buying a $20 telescope, a good beginner's telescope really isn't going to be that expensive for you. So here's what we recommend for a beginner's telescope. We recommend getting a reflecting telescope because overall they tend to be a bit cheaper than refractors. We recommend getting one on an Altitude-Azimuth mount because they're much more user-friendly. And we recommend getting somewhere between a 4 and 8 inch aperture. You don't want to go much smaller than a 4 inch because you're only really going to be able to observe the moon. If you look at anything smaller than a 4 inch, that's the other downside to the really, really cheap telescopes is they're very small and you're not going to get like these views that they're advertising on the box. It's not going to look anything like that through it. So if you want to look at things other than just the moon, get at least a 4 inch. And then we don't recommend getting much bigger than an 8 inch to start, just because that's when they start getting very heavy and cumbersome and difficult to travel with. So one design for a reflecting Alt-Az telescope that we think is kind of the best go-to for beginners is what we call a Dobsonian telescope. And that's what you're seeing here. The Dobsonian, the mount itself is kind of lower to the ground, but it's still the same thing. It turns side to side and up and down. Eyepiece is up here. If you want a specific kind of telescope to look for, these are all brands that either we have personally worked with and know are good and reliable, or we have heard from people that we trust who have lots of telescope experience. And if you want a specific telescope, this is the one I would recommend. By the company Orion, it's the SkyQuest XT6, so it's a 6 inch Dobsonian telescope. I have it linked in the video description. Again, we're not affiliated with this. We don't get any money from this. This is just from our experience. This is a fantastic beginner telescope. Couple $100. If you want, to get the 4 inch instead, it'll be a bit cheaper. This one in particular I like because the 6 inch is a pretty good size to look at lots of different things and still be very portable. But this also comes with a lot of cool accessories to use with it. All right, oops, we're seeing double of me. Okay, there we go. That is my spiel on ways that you can kind of observe and enjoy the nighttime sky. Eli, did we get any more questions?
No, that was the only one.
All right. Well, if anyone has any other questions, go ahead and throw them in the comments, and I can answer them in a little bit. But I will go ahead and hand it over to Lindsay, who's going to tell us about how you can get into astrophotography.
Yes, so getting into astrophotography is actually way easier than you think it is, and it can be way cheaper than you probably think it is also. You don't need Photoshop when you're starting out. When you look at guides for astrophotography and stuff online, a lot of times they'll recommend Photoshop. You do not need it. You don't need any photo editing software to start out. So anyway, okay, so first there's kind of two different types of astrophotography. Technically, astrophotography is actually taking pictures of the night sky through a telescope. So that's this picture on the right side here. Night sky photography is this picture on the left here. No telescope needed, just a camera. And you're just taking a wide field view of the night sky. So this picture was taken, if you were in the other show, I talked a little bit about how I was in Bryce Canyon National Park, and they had really, really dark skies there. That's where this was taken, in the darkest part of the park. This city over here is like 80 miles away. So there's really good seeing there. Whoops. But yeah, so this, believe it or not, was just taken with the most basic of things that I had. So, okay, at the very most basic, you do need a camera that can change the time exposure. When I started doing night sky photography, I know I don't look that old, but DSLRs were the only, which is this camera over here on the right, this fancy Canon one, that's what I have. Those were the only ones that could change time exposures. Phones, if they had a camera on them, they were really awful. So still, you have this option if you have a DSLR camera, or if you don't have a DSLR camera, but your camera still, you can change the time exposure on it. That's great. Some phones can do that now, actually, too, and I'll show you that in a little bit. Okay, you also need manual focus, and I'll explain why that is in a little bit. You need a tripod mount. So you need camera, you need tripod. You're going to be doing long exposures, obviously. So the tripod is so that you don't get like a shaky picture. Again, this is without any photo editing software. Also, this tripod right here is pretty fancy. That's kind of similar to what I have now. When I first started, I had a $20 tripod, camera tripod. And that's what I was using when I took this picture. So you don't need super fancy tripods and stuff. You can start out with just really basic tripods and cameras. You just need to be able to adjust the time exposure. So this is a screenshot of Jessica's phone. And so this is where now on phones, you actually have the option to change the time exposure and do a manual focus. And then again, though, you need a tripod for your phone. Again, no need for the photo editing software. Okay, so if you are looking at the back of your camera, this is the menu that you will most likely see, or this is Canon specifically, what you see on the back of a Canon camera. But all of the cameras, the DSLRs with the screens in the back, have very similar menus. And so this screen is kind of where you will kind of change all the settings that you need. And actually, I don't know what most of these options on the menu are still. I only need to know time exposure, ISO. That's pretty much it. I don't really play with the rest of it. So you don't even need to know what all of the things in the menu do. You just need to know where the things are that you need to use. So if you're using a lens, you're going to be switching the lens from this autofocus AF to manual focus MF. And that probably is a little bit scary at first, but I'll give you some tips. You also are going to need on your camera options here, you want to turn it to manual. And then you can do similar with your phone. So again, for just really basic, you just need to know the time exposure, or you just need to be able to change the time exposure and where that is on your menu. Okay, so this is that same picture that I was showing you earlier, that I have my $20 tripod. and my Canon camera. So when you first set up your camera, it's probably, I can pretty much guarantee it's not going to be in focus. And you can't do autofocus because stars are so tiny that your camera will not be able to autofocus on them. So you need to do manual focus, but it's not that scary. It takes a little bit of practice, but again, not too bad. So this is the first picture that I get. It's about 8 seconds. I do shorter exposures when I'm trying to focus, so I'm not waiting for 30 seconds for each picture to see if it's in focus yet. So you take a picture, about 8 seconds. Obviously, stars not in focus. So then you're going to change your focus a little bit and then take another 8-second picture. Change your focus a little bit and take another 8-second picture. And the best way that I've learned to actually figure out if you are super focused or not, on your back screen here of your camera, if you display the picture that you just took and then zoom in on the stars, and they should be super tiny little dots instead of kind of biggish circles. So when I finally got it focused, this is what I got. But again, this is still that 8-second exposure. And so I did more of like a 30-second exposure to get a picture like this. So again, all I did is get my camera in focus and change the time exposure to 30 seconds. 30 seconds is about the limit because the Earth is rotating and you don't realize how fast the Earth is rotating until you try to take a picture of the night sky. Okay. Again, no photo editing software for this. Also, with these pictures of the aurora, I did the super basic stuff. This again was when I had my $20 tripod. This was when I lived in Duluth like 10-ish years ago, and there were a lot more auroras going on then. So you just set up your tripod, set up your camera, get your image focused, and then time exposure. So, and this goes for any picture, not just with auroras, but sometimes it's nice to kind of play around with the exposure time. So you can see with this longer exposure, you can see more of kind of the purple haze part of the aurora. But if you do the 8 seconds, the aurora is not as bright, but you can see kind of more of the structure in the aurora. So it kind of depends on what you want to see there. And I usually do different exposure times every time I go out just to see what I end up with. Okay, so for intermediate night sky photography, again, not that difficult if you can change what's called an ISO. So you have your camera where you can change the time exposure and you have the manual focus. And now you are going to be changing the ISO setting. Again, you need your tripod. And again, we don't software yet. So on this menu, ISO settings are right here. So you would click on that and then change the ISO. This is what it would look like on your phone. Change the ISO to whatever setting you want. So the lowest ISO setting lets in the least amount of light. So if all of these pictures through all of these different ISOs were taken for 30 seconds, the lowest ISO lets in the least amount of light in that 30 seconds, and then the highest ISO takes in the most amount of light in that 30 seconds. So again, this is something that you can kind of switch around and play with to see what you like. I usually take pictures, at 3200, take a picture at 6400, 1600, and depending on what you want to look at, you can see that like in this 1600 ISO setting, the background is a lot darker than it is with this 25,600 ISO setting. So with this really high setting, you can kind of see more stars, but you kind of have more of a realistic, darker sky background with this 1600 setting. But again, all I'm using in this menu is this time exposure, shutter speed, and the ISO. That's it. You don't need to know what any of the other things are. Okay, this is a fun thing that's pretty easy. You just grab a flashlight and bring it with you. So you have your camera set up and your tripod and you get it focused and you do your time exposure, and then you can take your flashlight and aim it at things that you want to light up. So this is also at Bryce Canyon. I thought it was fun to have some prairie dog signs. They're so cute here. Another thing that you can do to light the foreground is use the moon. So the moon, as Jessica was saying, is its own natural light polluter. So if the moon is up, you will get the foreground lit up, but it will also kind of wash out some of the stars in the sky. So you kind of have to figure out, how much of the foreground do you want lit up? How much of the sky is going to get washed out? So what phase of moon do you want to go out and do your photography? That again is a little more advanced, looking up the moon phases, but the first times you do it, you don't need to do that. Just go out when the moon is out, try to take some pictures and see how that works with the foreground. Okay, so this finally is an image with Photoshop. All the other images previously were not edited at all. Those were just the images that came off the camera. Again, this was at Bryce Canyon, super, super dark night, no moon. And so the foreground and the rocks and things are black. So this is what they call a hoodoo at Bryce Canyon. This is actually Thor's hammer specifically. And you can see the Milky Way here. This is the Andromeda Galaxy. And the one thing in this picture that I really wanted to use Photoshop for, and also I never used Photoshop actually in my night sky photography for like the first 8 years. So you really don't need Photoshop. So I just used Photoshop to kind of pull out the green color in the sky. That is called air glow. And it is something that happens when you're in a really, really, really dark place. Okay, on to astrophotography. Okay, again, there's lots of nice cameras on phones now, and so we can do astrophotography with a telescope and a phone. So again, astrophotography is taking pictures through a telescope specifically. So you do need a telescope for this. And then if you're going to use the camera on your phone, there are phone mounts that you can get to mount it on the back of your scope. So this was taken actually by Jessica with her cell phone, with a cell phone mount and through a telescope, and it looks pretty good. You can see the kind of some stripes on Jupiter over here. You can see Saturn's rings. And again, no photo editing software was used for this.
And I will also say my phone is very old. So like newer phones are going to look so much better than what I was able to get.
It's amazing the cameras that are on phones now. So this would be a little bit more of an advanced setup. So this is with that DSLR camera, the Canon, that I used for my night sky photography. You get an adapter and then you attach that to the back of your telescope and you can take photos that way. Again, no need for that photo editing software. But again, just like with the night sky photography, you're going to need to focus until you get a clear picture. And then also kind of find what time exposure you want. Looking through the telescope, you're going to want a much shorter time than those 30-second night sky photography pics. if you try to do 30 seconds through a telescope, the telescope is going to move in that 30 seconds. Well, sorry, the telescope isn't moving, the Earth is moving, which makes the night sky move. So anyway, if you have too long of an exposure through the telescope, you'll end up with star trails. If you want that, cool, but usually you don't want that with the astrophotography. You can do that with the night sky photography though. Again, you'll have those ISO options on your camera. So again, brightest ISO, you can see more background fuzz, and so that might not actually be the best. You might want something that has a little bit, whoopsie, more of a darker background. And then the moon. The moon is deceptively difficult to take pictures of. And the ISO, really bright ISOs for the moon, you can see a lot of the moon features are washed out. And so you probably want to play with the ISO until you get the moon looking how you want it to look. And then this is a star cluster that was taken with a Canon DSLR camera through a telescope.
Yeah, way easier than people think.
Yeah, especially now that we have good cameras on our phones.
Yeah. And I know she showed like screenshots from my phone. So my phone has a setting that you literally, it's called Pro Mode, and that just lets you change exposure time and ISO. And I'm fairly certain most phones have that, especially now. Again, mine is very old.
So you just need that and a tripod, and then get it focused and take pictures.
Yeah, that's it. And one thing to say is photography of any sort, not just night sky. I mean, it's an art. There's no right or wrong to how things are supposed to look. Set the settings so that it's something that you like and you would be happy with, and that's what matters. And then, of course, the more you do it, the more comfortable you get, the
Right.
more you sort of learn kind of intuitively what these settings mean, the better you'll get.
And like how you want to set up your frame and things like that. And mostly other people haven't seen my night sky photography. It's mostly just been for myself.
Yeah, same. Most of mine has just been, I'm here, especially once I got that cell phone mount. I was like, I just want to play. I just want to take stuff. So yeah, it's a lot of fun to get into, and I love it. And yeah, and then if you are interested in starting to do some of the like photo editing, because I mean, again, a lot of people do, there are even free web-based versions of Photoshop that you can try out before committing to purchasing. I think there's also just free versions of software that's like it.
There's also something, it's also by Adobe, it's called Lightroom. And it is just has the most basic stuff of Photoshop. So you don't get, if you don't need the advanced settings of Photoshop, you could just kind of ignore those and just use the more basic settings that are in Lightroom.
Yeah, but it's not a requirement. You don't have to have it.
Nope. Again, the first like 8 years I did night sky photography, I did not have Photoshop or anything.
So if we have inspired you to give it a shot, we would love to see any pictures that you take. So if you would like to share them with us, you can always kind of tag us on social media. We would be thrilled to see. And I guess that kind of leads us into the rest of the week, right? So first off, I wanted to show, because I did a little Googling, and I think actually, Eli, you may have shared this map of the light pollution map. I don't remember if it was you or if it was Chickwalk that shared it.
I don't think I did that.
Okay, then this was
I did at one point a long time ago, but
okay, this was another page then that I saw.
okay.
It must have been Chickawauk that shared it. Or maybe it was Voyagers, because Voyagers is a national, is a dark sky park now.
Yeah.
So you can see this is just showing light pollution, and you can see how eastern US is just awful with light pollution. But then we have our little spot up here in northern Minnesota where we get super dark skies. And you don't see that anywhere else except out west, where you have a bunch of deserts and national parks. And yeah, you don't go away, email. So yeah, this is what we're trying to preserve right there. Our little dark sky spot. All right. So tomorrow, that's actually what we're going to be talking more about. We'll have a guest from the Chickawauk Museum and Nature Center who's going to talk more about what being dark sky sanctioned means and kind of ways that we can help preserve our dark skies. And then we'll also take a look at some of the really cool things that are up in the night sky that you can see specifically in really, really dark skies. And then the rest of the week, I just put up the graphic, is our star parties that we're going to have Wednesday in Duluth, Thursday at Catadio State Park, Friday at North House Folk School in Grand Marais, and Saturday at Chickawauk Museum and Nature Center, which is up at the end of the Gunflint Trail into those super, super dark skies. All of this information can be found on our social media and on our website, so you can have kind of the dates and locations and stuff for that. We are making a slight change to how the star parties are going to work because we want to make sure that we keep our staff and our community healthy. We are going to be viewing the telescope through a camera. So we'll have a camera on the telescope hooked up to a screen, and you'll be able to see what the view looks like through the telescope. Hopefully you'll still come out and enjoy it, enjoy the views, see some really awesome stuff. We'll also be doing some live sky tours that kind of point things out to you and can teach you how to use things like the star charts and the apps on your phone and all of that, and maybe even get you set up with some pictures. I don't know. I mean, if you bring out a phone and a tripod, we definitely help you. So yeah, just that one little change to that, just because we want to make sure we're keeping everyone safe and don't feel safe with hundreds of people sharing an eyepiece. But it'll still be great. I'm still excited. We're still very excited to be going out. So yeah, that's our plan for this week. Did we have any other questions?
No
It's
other
not
questions.
looking like it. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us for night one of our Dark Sky Caravan. We hope to see you again tomorrow for our second and last of the virtual shows, and then come out for our star parties as well. One benefit to us using the camera is we will actually be able to stream the views through the telescope, and so we'll have those up as well. So for anyone who's not in the area, you'll be able to kind of see what we're seeing as well. So one kind of benefit there to using the camera. All right, thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we will see you next time. Bye, everyone.